the oil discovery that changed everything. In 1901, British investor William Knox D'Arcy obtained drilling rights across 480,000 square miles of Iranian territory, leading to a discovery at Mossadegh Soleimani in May 1908 that would reshape global politics for over a century. British geologists quickly realized they had found reserves that dwarfed anything previously discovered outside the United States. Within months, additional surveys revealed that Iran possessed what would eventually be recognized as some of the world's largest petroleum deposits. The British government immediately understood the strategic implications of controlling these resources, particularly as the Royal Navy was transitioning from coal to oil-powered vessels. The formation of the Anglo-Persian Oil Company in 1909 established a framework that would become the template for resource extraction agreements throughout the developing world. The British structured the company to ensure maximum benefit for themselves while providing minimal compensation to Iran. Iran received just 16% of net profits under the 1909 oil concession, while Britain controlled every aspect of the operation from exploration and extraction to refining and marketing. Iranian authorities had no oversight of the company's financial records or operational decisions. This arrangement represented a new form of economic exploitation that achieved colonial results through agreements that appeared voluntary but were structurally unfair. Iran maintained nominal sovereignty over its territory, while the British extracted the country's most valuable natural resource under terms that guaranteed Iranian dependence and British enrichment. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company's growth rate proved exceptional even by the standards of the early petroleum industry. By 1914, the company had constructed the world's largest oil refinery at Abadan, employing over 20,000 workers and processing hundreds of thousands of barrels daily. The British government recognized the company's strategic importance by purchasing a controlling stake, making it the first major government investment in a private oil company. This decision transformed what had begun as a commercial venture into an instrument of British foreign policy. Within 2 decades, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company had become the British Empire's most profitable overseas investment, generating more revenue than entire colonial territories in Africa and Asia. The company's success financed Britain's naval supremacy during World War I and provided the energy resources that powered British industry through the 1920s and 1930s. Iranian oil literally fueled Britain's position as a global superpower, while Iran itself remained economically underdeveloped and politically marginalized. Iranian awareness of this systematic exploitation grew gradually as educated Iranians began to understand the true value of what their country was providing versus what it received in return. Iranian workers at Abadan lived in segregated company housing that was markedly inferior to facilities provided for British employees. Iranian engineers and technicians were excluded from senior positions regardless of their qualifications, while British personnel received salaries 10 times higher for equivalent work. These visible inequalities reinforced the growing perception that the oil arrangement represented economic subjugation. Intellectual and political figures within Iran began questioning the fundamental legitimacy of the concession arrangement by the 1920s. Journalists like Ahmad Khosravi wrote extensively about the disparity between Iran's oil wealth and the country's economic development, while politicians in the Iranian parliament raised concerns about the lack of transparency in the Anglo-Persian Oil Company's financial reporting. Religious leaders also began framing the oil concession in terms of foreign exploitation of Muslim resources, adding a religious dimension to what had initially been purely economic grievances. The company's transformation into the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company in 1935 reflected both Iran's name change under Reza Shah Pahlavi and the growing scope of British petroleum operations throughout the country. However, the fundamental structure of the agreement remained unchanged despite Iranian attempts to renegotiate more favorable terms. British officials consistently rejected Iranian proposals for increased revenue sharing, greater operational oversight, or requirements for local hiring and training programs. These early experiences with Western economic exploitation established patterns of Iranian thinking that persist today. The perception that Western powers would use economic agreements to extract Iranian resources while providing minimal benefits in return became deeply embedded in Iranian political culture. The oil concession demonstrated that formal sovereignty meant little if foreign companies controlled a country's most valuable assets under agreements that prevented meaningful Iranian participation or oversight. The Anglo-Iranian oil company's operations also established the precedent for Western intervention in Iranian domestic politics to protect economic interests. British officials regularly lobbied Iranian government ministers, provided financial incentives to supportive politicians, and threatened economic retaliation against officials who questioned the concession terms. This pattern of using economic leverage to influence Iranian political decisions would become a recurring theme throughout the 20th century. By the 1940s, Iranian resentment toward the oil arrangement had evolved from scattered complaints into organized political opposition. The company's profits during World War II reached unprecedented levels, while Iranian workers faced dangerous working conditions and minimal wage increases. Iranian intellectuals increasingly viewed the oil concession as a symbol of their country's subjugation to foreign economic interests. The irony of Iran's situation became increasingly apparent as other oil-producing regions negotiated more favorable agreements with international companies. While countries like Venezuela and Mexico secured revenue-sharing arrangements approaching 50%, Iran remained locked into a concession that provided less than 20% of profits from its own natural resources. This disparity fueled Iranian determination to eventually assert greater control over their petroleum industry, regardless of British opposition. The foundation laid by the Anglo-Persian oil company's exploitative practices created the underlying dynamic that would drive Iranian-Western relations for the next century. Iranian leaders learned that Western powers viewed Iran primarily as a source of cheap energy rather than as a sovereign nation deserving of equitable economic partnerships. This lesson would influence Iranian responses to every subsequent Western proposal, creating a cycle of suspicion and mistrust. As global tensions escalated in the late 1930s, Iran's leaders believed they could navigate the coming storm by staying out of foreign conflicts entirely. They would soon discover that possessing the world's most strategic resources made neutrality impossible. When neutrality became impossible, Iran's declaration of neutrality when World War II erupted across Europe appeared reasonable for a nation that had suffered under foreign interference for decades. The country possessed no significant military alliance with either the Axis or Allied powers and had legitimate reasons to avoid entanglement in a conflict that seemed distant from Iranian interests. Reza Shah Pahlavi announced that Iran would remain neutral and focus on internal development rather than choosing sides in what many observers initially expected to be another European war. The Allied powers viewed Iran's neutrality declaration with immediate suspicion and growing alarm as the war's scope expanded. Britain and the Soviet Union recognized that Iran's geographic position made true neutrality essentially impossible once Germany launched Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union in June 1941. Iran sat directly between the Soviet Union's vulnerable southern borders and British-controlled territories in the Middle East and India. The country's location meant that Iranian neutrality could either facilitate or prevent crucial supply lines between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union at the moment when Stalin's regime faced the greatest military threat in its history. Reza Shah Pahlavi's modernization programs and political orientation provided additional reasons for Allied concern about Iranian intentions during the war. The Shah had spent the previous 2 decades implementing an aggressive modernization campaign that drew inspiration from European models, including some aspects of fascist organization and efficiency. His admiration for German industrial and military achievements was well known among diplomatic circles, and he had invited German advisors to assist with various development projects throughout the 1930s. German companies had secured significant contracts for railroad construction, industrial development, and technical assistance programs that created substantial German influence within Iran's modernizing economy. The Shah's perceived sympathies toward Nazi Germany extended beyond simple commercial relationships to include ideological elements that worried both British and Soviet officials. German propaganda had found receptive audiences among some Iranian intellectuals who viewed Nazi theories about Aryan racial superiority as validation of Persian historical greatness. German agents had established networks within Iran that promoted anti-British and anti-Soviet sentiment while positioning Germany as a potential ally against traditional imperial powers. Iran's crucial geographic position transformed the country into a strategic prize that neither side could afford to lose once the war expanded beyond Europe. The Persian Gulf provided the most direct route for shipping military supplies from American and British factories to Soviet ports, while Iran's northern borders offered potential access to Soviet oil fields in the Caucasus region that fueled Stalin's war machine. German control over Iran would have severed this vital supply corridor, while simultaneously threatening the oil resources that powered Britain's global military operations. The threat to British oil interests went beyond simple economic considerations to encompass fundamental questions of imperial survival during the war. The Abadan refinery processed more petroleum than any other facility in the British Empire and supplied fuel for military operations from North Africa to the Pacific Theater. German seizure of these facilities would have simultaneously deprived Britain of essential energy resources while providing the Nazi war machine with additional fuel supplies at a critical moment in the conflict. Soviet concerns about Iranian neutrality focused on the possibility of German forces using Iranian territory to launch attacks against vulnerable Soviet positions in Central Asia and the Caucasus. The Soviet Union's southern borders remained lightly defended because Stalin had concentrated most available forces against the German advance through Eastern Europe. German divisions operating from Iranian bases could potentially capture the Baku oil fields that provided much of the Soviet Union's petroleum production, or advance into Central Asia to threaten industrial centers that had been relocated beyond German reach. The Anglo-Soviet invasion of Iran began on August 25, 1941, with coordinated attacks from both directions. Vastly outnumbered and ill-equipped, Iran surrendered in days, and Allied forces installed a pliant monarch. British forces advanced from Iraq into southwestern Iran, while Soviet divisions crossed the northern borders simultaneously. The speed of the military defeat demonstrated Iran's complete inability to defend its territory against determined foreign intervention. British and Soviet forces carved Iran into distinct occupation zones with minimal consultation of Iranian authorities. The British established control over southern Iran, including the vital oil installations around Abadan and the Persian Gulf ports needed for supply operations. Soviet forces occupied northern Iran, including the capital Tehran and the industrial centers that had been developed during Reza Shah's modernization programs. This division reflected each power's strategic priorities while reducing Iran to a passive territory under foreign military administration. The forced abdication of Reza Shah Pahlavi eliminated the last symbol of Iranian independence and demonstrated the complete subordination of Iranian sovereignty to Allied military requirements. British and Soviet officials demanded the Shah's removal because they viewed him as unreliable and potentially sympathetic to German interests. They replaced him with his 21-year-old son Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who lacked his father's political experience and assertiveness. Over 30,000 U.S. troops used Iran's corridor to funnel crucial supplies to the USSR. American personnel took control of Iran's railroad system, port facilities, and transportation networks to ensure efficient delivery of military aid. The massive American military presence transformed Iran into a crucial Allied logistics hub that operated according to foreign military requirements rather than Iranian national interests. Iranian civilians opposed the occupation through mass protests and political demonstrations that erupted across major cities. Students organized strikes at universities, while merchants closed their shops in acts of civil disobedience. Religious leaders denounced the foreign occupation from mosque pulpits, framing the invasion as an assault on Islamic sovereignty. These expressions of popular resistance were systematically suppressed by Allied forces who viewed Iranian opposition as a threat to their strategic objectives. The wartime occupation convinced many Iranians that their national sovereignty remained conditional on foreign approval, regardless of their government's official policies or international legal rights. The experience of seeing their country divided between foreign armies despite Iran's neutral status created lasting suspicions about Western intentions and commitments to Iranian independence. This lesson would influence Iranian responses to subsequent Western proposals and contribute to the cycle of mistrust that continues to define Iranian-American relations today. The war's end brought hope that foreign armies would withdraw and restore Iranian independence, but the reality proved far more complicated. Britain's determination to maintain control over Iranian oil resources would soon collide with a new generation of Iranian leaders who had witnessed firsthand what foreign domination meant for their country's future. The prime minister who dared to nationalize. Mohammad Mossadegh emerged from the post-war period as the embodiment of Iranian frustration with decades of British economic exploitation. The 70-year-old politician possessed impeccable credentials as a champion of Iranian sovereignty, having earned a law degree from the University of Paris and spent decades advocating for constitutional government and national independence. His aristocratic background provided him with the social standing necessary to challenge foreign powers, while his legal training gave him the technical expertise to understand exactly how the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company had structured its operations to maximize British profits at Iranian expense. When he became prime minister in April 1951 through democratic election, Mossadegh represented the culmination of 50 years of growing Iranian awareness that their country's most valuable resource was being systematically stolen by foreign interests. The situation that Mossadegh inherited demonstrated that Allied victory in World War II had changed nothing fundamental about Iran's subordinate economic relationship with Britain. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company continued operating under the same basic terms established in 1909, providing Iran with just 16% of profits, while British shareholders received the remaining 84% from Iranian oil. The company still refused to open its financial records to Iranian auditors or provide detailed accounting of expenses that reduced Iran's share of net profits. Iranian workers remained excluded from senior management positions regardless of their qualifications, while British personnel continued to receive salaries 10 times higher than Iranian workers performing identical tasks. The Iranian parliament's decision to nationalize the oil industry represented one of the most remarkable displays of national unity in the country's modern history. The Majlis voted unanimously to transfer control of all Anglo-Iranian Oil Company assets to the newly created National Iranian Oil Company, with support spanning the entire political spectrum from religious conservatives to secular leftists. This unprecedented consensus reflected the depth of Iranian resentment toward British economic exploitation and the widespread belief that nationalization represented Iran's best opportunity to achieve genuine economic independence. Massive public demonstrations throughout the country celebrated the nationalization decision, with hundreds of thousands of Iranians taking to the streets to express support for Mossadegh's government and its challenge to British dominance. Britain's response to the nationalization exceeded even the most pessimistic Iranian expectations for British retaliation. The British government imposed a comprehensive oil embargo that prevented Iran from selling petroleum to any international buyers, effectively cutting off the revenue source that provided more than 60% of the Iranian government's total budget. Royal Navy warships patrolled the Persian Gulf to intercept any tankers attempting to load Iranian oil, while British diplomatic pressure convinced most major oil companies to refuse contracts with the National Iranian Oil Company. The embargo extended beyond petroleum to include restrictions on other Iranian exports and limitations on international banking services that made it difficult for Iran to conduct foreign trade of any kind. The British campaign to portray Iranian nationalization as theft rather than legitimate exercise of sovereignty proved crucial for building international support for economic pressure against Mossadegh's government. British officials argued that Iran had violated international law by seizing British-owned assets without adequate compensation, framing the dispute as a simple case of nationalization versus property rights rather than a complex issue of colonial exploitation and national sovereignty. This narrative gained traction among Western governments and business communities who worried about the precedent that successful Iranian nationalization might establish for their own overseas investments in developing countries. British diplomatic efforts to isolate Iran internationally achieved significant success as the oil embargo continued into its second year. The United States initially maintained neutrality in the dispute, but gradually moved towards supporting the British position as concerns grew about potential Soviet influence in Iran during the economic crisis. European governments aligned with Britain partly out of alliance solidarity and partly from worry about the implications of successful resource nationalization in their own colonial territories. Iran found itself increasingly isolated diplomatically at precisely the moment when international support was most crucial for breaking the British embargo. The economic hardship created by the oil embargo began undermining popular support for Mossadegh's government as unemployment soared and essential goods became scarce throughout Iran. Government revenues dropped by more than half as oil exports ceased, forcing dramatic cuts in public spending and government employment. Inflation accelerated as the shortage of foreign currency made it difficult to import consumer goods and industrial materials, while the closure of oil facilities eliminated tens of thousands of jobs in the petroleum sector and related industries. The economic crisis particularly affected urban middle-class Iranians who had initially supported nationalization, but now faced unemployment and declining living standards. Internal political divisions within Iran began emerging as the economic situation continued deteriorating without any apparent resolution to the oil crisis. Conservative politicians and religious leaders who had initially supported nationalization began questioning whether the policy was worth the economic suffering it had caused for ordinary Iranians. Military officers grew concerned about the impact of reduced government spending on defense capabilities, while business leaders worried about the long-term consequences of Iran's international isolation. These fractures in the nationalist coalition provided opportunities for foreign intelligence services to exploit Iranian political divisions and build opposition to Mossadegh's continued leadership. Britain's determination to regain control of Iranian oil resources at any cost became increasingly apparent as diplomatic and economic pressure failed to force Mossadegh's capitulation. British officials began exploring more direct forms of intervention, including support for Iranian opposition groups and coordination with foreign intelligence services. The British recognized that successful Iranian nationalization would encourage similar actions by other oil-producing countries, potentially undermining British energy security and economic interests throughout the Middle East and developing world. This strategic concern made compromise impossible from the British perspective and guaranteed continued escalation of the conflict. The oil crisis had created conditions that made direct Western intervention in Iranian politics both possible and attractive to British planners. Economic hardship had weakened public support for Mossadegh's government while creating grievances that could be exploited to build domestic opposition. International isolation had reduced Iran's ability to resist foreign pressure or seek alternative sources of support. Most importantly, the stakes involved in controlling Iranian oil resources were high enough to justify extraordinary measures for regaining British dominance over this crucial strategic asset. By the summer of 1953, British intelligence officials had concluded that only the most drastic action could restore their position in Iran. Operation Ajax, the CIA's first Middle Eastern coup. The CIA and British MI6 transformed this strategic necessity into Operation Ajax, one of the most consequential covert operations in modern history. British intelligence officials approached their American counterparts with a proposal to overthrow Iran's democratically elected government through coordinated subversion and violence. The British had already developed detailed plans for removing Mossadegh from power, but lacked the resources and regional influence necessary to execute the operation successfully. American participation would provide the financial backing, intelligence capabilities, and political cover needed to transform a British revenge scheme into a joint Western intervention that could reshape Iranian politics permanently. The operation required careful presentation to American officials who remained skeptical about direct intervention in Iranian domestic affairs. British intelligence operatives framed the proposed coup as an essential defensive measure against Soviet expansion in the Middle East, rather than an attempt to restore British economic privileges in Iran. They argued that Mossadegh's nationalist government was creating conditions that would inevitably lead to communist takeover, pointing to the Tudeh party's growing influence and the economic crisis that had weakened Iran's ability to resist Soviet pressure. This narrative resonated with American policymakers who viewed the Cold War through the lens of global competition with the Soviet Union and were predisposed to support any action that prevented communist expansion. The specific tactics developed for Operation Ajax demonstrated sophisticated understanding of Iranian political dynamics and social tensions. CIA operatives under the direction of Kermit Roosevelt Jr. established networks of Iranian agents who could organize street demonstrations, distribute propaganda materials, and coordinate with sympathetic military officers. The operation included provisions for bribing key Iranian officials, purchasing the loyalty of tribal leaders, and creating the appearance of widespread popular opposition to Mossadegh's government. Propaganda campaigns portrayed the prime minister as a communist sympathizer who was betraying Iranian religious traditions and national independence to foreign powers. Military officers represented the most crucial component of the coup plan because their participation would provide the force necessary to physically remove Mossadegh from power. CIA operatives identified Iranian military commanders who opposed the prime minister for personal, political, or financial reasons and offered substantial payments for their cooperation. These officers were promised continued American support and enhanced positions within the post-coup government in exchange for their participation in the operation. The conspiracy relied on the assumption that sufficient numbers of Iranian military personnel could be convinced to act against their own government when provided with foreign encouragement and financial incentives. The initial coup attempt on August 15, 1953, collapsed within hours as Iranian security forces loyal to Mossadegh arrested the military officers attempting to deliver the Shah's dismissal decree. The operation's failure appeared complete when the Shah fled Iran for Iraq, convinced that the coup had been definitively defeated and that his own position was untenable. Many CIA operatives prepared to abandon the mission and evacuate Iran, believing that the window for successful intervention had closed permanently. The collapse of the first attempt demonstrated the risks inherent in covert operations and the difficulty of predicting how Iranian political actors would respond to foreign manipulation. The decision to attempt a second coup reflected the enormous stakes involved in the operation's outcome and the CIA's determination to achieve success despite the initial failure. Kermit Roosevelt Jr. convinced his superiors that the situation remained salvageable if the operation could generate sufficient street violence to create the appearance of popular uprising against Mossadegh's government. The revised plan focused on organizing larger demonstrations and provoking confrontations between pro-Shah and pro-Mossadegh crowds that would justify military intervention to restore order. The violent street battles that erupted across Tehran on August 19, 1953, resulted in approximately 300 Iranian deaths, as competing crowds fought for control of key government buildings and strategic locations throughout the city. CIA-funded demonstrators armed with clubs and improvised weapons attacked Mossadegh supporters, while Iranian military units loyal to the coup plotters moved to secure radio stations, government offices, and military installations. The violence escalated throughout the day as both sides called for reinforcements, and the confrontations spread beyond the capital to other Iranian cities. Mossadegh's arrest occurred after loyalist military units defending his residence were overwhelmed by tank units commanded by officers participating in the coup conspiracy. The Prime Minister's capture marked the definitive success of the operation and eliminated the primary obstacle to restoring the Shah's authority. The arrest was followed by a systematic roundup of Mossadegh supporters throughout the government, military, and civil society organizations. This purge ensured that potential opposition to the new regime would be eliminated before it could organize effective resistance to the coup's results. The restoration of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi to power included provisions for greatly expanded authority that transformed Iran's constitutional monarchy into an increasingly authoritarian system. The Shah returned from exile with American assurances of continued support and British agreement to resume oil operations under new terms. His enhanced powers included direct control over military appointments, expanded security services, and reduced parliamentary oversight of government decisions. The immediate restoration of Western oil companies to Iranian operations occurred under terms that were more favorable to Iran than the original British concession, but still maintained foreign control over the country's petroleum resources. The new consortium agreement provided Iran with 50% of oil profits, while American companies secured 40% of the remaining share. However, Western companies retained operational control of Iranian oil facilities and continued to exclude Iranians from senior management positions within the industry. Operation Ajax established the template for future CIA interventions throughout the developing world during the Cold War period. The operation's success demonstrated that covert action could achieve regime change objectives without the political costs associated with direct military intervention. The coup's success remained classified for more than 2 decades, allowing the United States to maintain its image as a supporter of democracy, while secretly celebrating one of intelligence history's most successful operations.